Okay, so today we are doing one of our lessons on attention, uh, one of our lessons on YiGong and the four directions. So I have a PowerPoint presentation. I guess one of the ways that I do PowerPoint presentations is I kind of alternate back and forth between the presentation and then myself, because as a student of Chinese medicine, there's nothing really worse than a teacher or an instructor just reading the slides word for word. So I'm not going to do that. We can make the slides available afterwards if anybody's interested, but otherwise, they're kind of just like cues for me to remember where I'm at, just in case I forget, because I am prone to 2-hour tangents. So we're going to do our best to avoid that by trying to remain organized. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and you will see the crisis of attention. All right, there we go. It's doing its thing. All right, the crisis of attention, understanding challenges in focus and mental engagement. So we're starting at the very beginning. We're starting with the need. What need is Qigong and the four directions of attention as a practice filling? I mean, why would anybody do this, right? It doesn't really make sense if nobody needs this practice that we would be focused on something like this. So there must be some sort of need, and that's what we're here for. All right, the crisis of attention. So let's see. All right, so we're going to start with my grandpa's wisdom, and the words are kind of jumbled up on the PowerPoint. So I promise all of these types of things will improve over time as we get better at this. But my grandpa's principle, I'll just kind of tell you the story real quick. So I'm in Colorado. I think I'm a teenager, right? Like maybe 13, 14, I don't even know. I was fortunate enough to go visit my grandparents in Colorado several times, when I was growing up. I didn't always go with my mom and dad either. I would just go, I think one time I went with my brother, one time I went by myself. So, being a younger person going on a journey by yourself, that's a lot of fun. And I don't remember what prompted the conversation. I don't like even remember what I told my grandpa I was interested in doing, but we were in his driveway and I said something, that obviously spurred the conversation. But I mentioned something that I want to do in life. Maybe it was like my big goal, maybe my career aspirations. I can't quite remember that detail, like what I told him. But he gave me one of his grandpa lectures on usefulness. Is what you want to do something that somebody actually needs? And then he got into a little bit of a tangent about competition because he taught bass, string bass and symphony orchestra, and he taught it at university. He taught music at university for a long time. So he used that as an example. So he said, I teach in the course of a decade or so, I teach thousands of students, you know, 10, 15 students a year on string bass. And some of them say that they have aspirations to be on the symphony orchestra of that state. And he's like, that's great. We need to have aspirations, we need to have goals, even if they seem really difficult. He said, but there's also a little need for being realistic. He pointed out that the chair in the symphony orchestra only turns over like once every 25 to 30 years. And when that seat does turn over, like when there becomes a vacancy in the symphony orchestra, there's thousands of people vying for that position. It's not just five people and they just, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. There's hundreds, if not thousands of people who want that spot in the symphony orchestra. They've been waiting for it too. And he's like, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's good to have another plan. It's good to have something else that you're going to want to do in the community because string bass, there's no need. Like there's no need for that. There's very few vacancies across the country, and when they do become vacant, it's highly competitive. And when a seat is filled, it's typically filled for a few decades. It's not a high rotation. So he was pointing out that, at the same time, he didn't want to crush my spirits, whatever I had suggested, he didn't want to crush that. But also, he was trying to instill a little bit of wisdom in there, a little bit of let's have a backup plan. And so that really got me thinking, not right at the time, but reflecting back on it, it really got me thinking about, the purpose of something, the usefulness of something. Are we creating something that is readily already available? Which again, if somebody does that, then maybe they're putting their own spin or, they're putting their own unique nature on it, and that's fine. But in principle, the idea is to fill a need where there is a need. Find something in the community, find something in your country, find something, in this case, in the human species, that there is an obvious need for something. There's a gap. And so we're going to talk about that gap. Okay, so we should be back on our slides. So the thing that we're going to talk about, and yeah, this was a timeless principle and things like that. But we're going to get into that gap that needs filled. And one of the things that when you become a more critical thinker, when you're able to think from multiple perspectives and multiple angles, and things aren't as binary maybe as they once were, you realize that the crisis of our species isn't just one thing. However, one major root cause for the dysfunction of the human species is what I call the crisis of attention. And what is that? So what do I mean by crisis of attention? Well, I am in the process of starting what, as far as I know, is the very first school of focus and attention. I'm sure there is, in the US somewhere, so I'm sure someone has heard of it or someone can go find it, but it's obviously not readily available because I know of none. And I've been doing this for a very long time. So I've been studying the mind and studying attention and working to improve my own life for as long as I can remember, which is really odd for a young person to think about, but nonetheless. So what do we mean by the crisis of attention? I think one of the I think one of the main things that I'm talking about is fractured attention. And attention that is no longer being placed. It's kind of in a probability loop as to where attention is going to land. So right now in our modern era, attention is scattered. It is spread all over the place. It is helter-skelter. It is here, it is there, and it is everywhere. So the practice that we're presenting, YiGong and the four directions of attention, it addresses this. So it's filling the need. We have found the need, and now we have found a way to address basically a global attention deficit and inability to focus, inability to place attention with purpose, with intention. So, and I mean, if we look at some of these bullet points, YiGong is strategies to reclaim our focus. And we'll get into these nitty-gritty details. There will be no word that is left undefined. I'm not like that. I'm very deliberate with my words and how I use them. So when we talk about focus is sustained attention. Attention is our ability to isolate aspects of our sensory environment, our sensory input, our perceived experience, isolate aspects of that while ignoring or not isolating other aspects. Focus is the ability to sustain attention, to maintain its deliberate nature, to place it purposefully. And the condition that we're in right now is that attention is not placed purposefully. It is pulled by essentially just mathematic probabilities. So the probability of you opening your phone, if this is something that you do often and you've been doing it often since, cell phones and the digital age got hot, which was what, 1997 or something like that, so the digital age really started to catch on fire in 2005, 2010. Everybody had a cell phone. So the switch of attention to look at your cell phone and then not just look at your cell phone, but now you're looking at different apps and you're looking at different social media streams and you're looking, maybe it's productivity. Maybe you're looking at different tools for productivity, but it's kind of just the probability field collapsing. There's a 98% probability that as soon as a person feels bored on the train, they're going to reach for their phone. And the only way to begin to affect that probability field, that probability scale, is with deliberate attention, focus, and practicing to do it. So hopefully that makes sense. But so what we're describing right now is a crisis in the whole world where human beings in general are just not that great at maintaining focus attention. We don't really learn about it in school. We don't really have any special schools. There's people, human beings who will have really great focus in one area. Maybe it's their passion, maybe it's something that they really like, and that makes sense. But then in every other aspect of their life, that same amount of focus isn't there for whatever reason. Everybody's a little bit different. Every life situation isn't the same. So this isn't going to be an identical situation across the board, but the root of the issue remains attention that is a leaf at the mercy of the wind. And we're going to talk about that wind here in a couple slides. So I'll review my slides and just make sure that I'm still talking about the thing that I'm supposed to be talking about, because I have a tendency of talking about other things. Yeah, so YiGong are strategies to reclaim this focus. Now, I'm a Chinese medicine practitioner, acupuncture, and I'm going to be learning all of the herbal medicine and everything like that. But one thing that Chinese medicine has understood very well is that our attention or deficit of attention, our ability to be attentive, to be present, to place our attention into the field of our awareness on purpose. When we don't do that, better yet, when we can't do that for whatever reason, it creates mental health and productivity loss. And we're seeing that on a global, national scale. Again, not every country is exactly the same. Not every culture or group of people is exactly the same. So we're going to see variations and differences in how this is expressed, but it's still expressing the same psychological suffering, the same dysfunction. Attention scarcity. And it's not just in a digital age, although the digital age is driving it. Like it's a huge driver for distraction. And we need a massive cultural shift. And if you're watching this video, if you're interested in YiGong and the four directions as a practice that a person does, then we're beginning to make that cultural shift. We're starting to look and say, hey, what's really going on? What is the human experience all about? All right, so that should bring me to my next slide. Let's see if this thing wants to slide. I don't even know. Is that the right one? Okay. I'm just going to pretend that this is the right one, and if we have to jump around, that's fine. So this is basically just a slide that shows you the amount of sensory data now compared to the amount of sensory data that's available. So what does that mean? What am I talking about? Sensory data. So every human being is sensing their environment. Right now, you're likely listening to me. You may be looking at the computer screen. So now you're using auditory and visual sensory perception. And that's how you get an idea of what is happening around you. So is that idea exactly what's happening? No. No, what is happening around you is subject to your mind's ability to filter and frame your situation, right? The perception and experience is filtered and is framed through the human mind and the human brain. So what that slide was pointing out is that in the 15th century, you didn't have a lot of stimuli. You had your normal stuff, nature, you had the sounds of the working village, maybe, like hammers and wagons or whatever. But today, in the modern era, we are literally being bombarded with stimuli. So our cell phone, the TV, just people everywhere, these days, especially if you're living in a big city like Chicago, where I live. There are literally people everywhere. I had a friend that lived in India, and he said, forget Chicago, it is nothing And then he actually showed me a video. He held up his cell phone while he was in traffic, and he was not lying. It looked like a million person march or something, but it was literally just Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. and there were people shoulder to shoulder, neck to neck, cheek to cheek. And it was, wow, okay. So now more than ever, the human being is being bombarded with so much sensory data. And now just think of probabilities. So what is a probability? 0 to 100%. 0% means that this can't happen. 100% means that this is guaranteed to happen. Well, in statistics, we don't really deal with 0 and 100. We're somewhere in between those things, usually. So the the percentage, the sheer percentage of incoming stimuli, which you could call data, right? It's information that's coming in to your field of awareness, and your brain is taking, or your sensory organs are receiving it, and then it is translating it into chemical messengers, and then the brain is translating those chemical messengers to create a picture of your environment. Every human being, every animal, in fact, is doing this. It's pretty much the way that it is. And that's cool. So we have all of the stimuli coming in, and that is affecting the probability cloud, right? In the 15th century, you had much less information, much less stimuli coming into your bubble. And so, that's not that bad. I can kind of sift through that. But now it's not the same. There's so much information coming in that is directly impacting the probability of where your attention is going to go. Where is your attention going to land, and for how long is now just being left to all of the data and stimuli that's influencing that probability field or probability cloud. Okay, so going back to my PowerPoint. All right, so let's see what the next page has for me. And so in my book, I get into this in great detail because it's really important. In psychology and neuroscience, we do have a term for this, and it's called continuous partial attention. And worse than just being partial, it is not chosen. It is just a direct result of the probabilities of where your mind goes most often, what it's most easily pulled by. And so doing this is essentially like a laser beam. If a laser beam is focused, it's very powerful. It can cut through things. But if a laser beam is scattered in a trillion, 1,000 different directions, I don't know why I said a trillion, that's a big number. 1,000, okay. So it's in 1,000 different directions, it's not going to have the same capability. It's not going to do what it can when it's a single laser beam of energy. And so when attention is continuously partial, well, guess what? We've done studies on this. We've done research in the United States on the impact of attention when it's constantly partial and constantly being divided and constantly switching tasks. So there's also a term in psychology, and we'll get into that later, but when the mind is constantly switching from one task to another, and I mean constantly, like every second, every half second, the mind is just rapidly going from one thing to another, there's a metabolic expense. So it's actually using our metabolic energy, our ATP. ATP is the chemical energy that we use to exist. Without that, there's no human being as we know it. There's no human being without ATP. That's our chemical energy. So continuous partial attention, and we can show this through different studies, that it has a huge impact on our ability to perform. It has a huge impact on our ability to do things like scheduled work, focus on certain things, set boundaries. So when you sit down and you're like, all right, I'm going to study this subject for 30 minutes, and literally 2 minutes later, you're looking at your cell phone, or you're, looking over at somebody else's conversation, or you're wondering what you're going to have for lunch, or You forgot what you had for breakfast and you're trying to recall, but the point is that the mind has wandered. And then it's continuously partial. It's not quite focused on a single or even two things. I just put it to two things. It's still scattered. It's still fragmented. And then so when this happens, the mind is less organized. The mind has trouble navigating that probability. It's literally just a cloud that is at the mercy of the currents of the wind. Now, of course, because we live in the United States, this is well known. This is well studied. And we live in at least in the US. I don't if you have a different economic system than the United States, then that's fine. But we live in a capitalistic society. And so what I'm talking about, it's not unknown. This isn't, revolutionary information. Hopefully it's well organized and well delivered, but it's not new. And so corporations and, mainly corporations, but also the federal government, state governments, the world knows that attention that is scattered, attention that isn't focused, attention that is aloof to simple, basic probabilities is easily captured. It's easily pulled. It's easily coerced. It's easily influenced. And you could say, by extension, it's easily controlled. And so it's not as benign as I was making it sound just a little bit ago. Because a little bit ago, I was kind of, just making it sound like, the mind is, it's just being bombarded by stimuli. That's nobody's fault. Okay, no. No, no, then that's not exactly true either, because now corporations and businesses and governments, they actually know about all of this. And so they're trying to commodify, they're trying to turn your attention into dollars, right? So they want to profit from your lack of focus, from your inability. And when I say you, I'm just talking to anybody. Um, Not everybody is in the same amount of scattered attention, so everything applies differently. But they're trying to capture your attention. They're trying to turn your attention into a revenue stream. And to some extent, like it's like, okay, that's to be expected. We live in a world where there's advertisements and there's emails and all of these things are constantly coming in. That makes sense. But no, they're actually doing it somewhat maliciously. They know that they can, I would almost use the word prey. It's almost like a predator-prey relationship where the predator are the corporations and the governments, and the prey is the human being whose attention is not specific. It is not intentional. It is just in a default state in which probability is influencing where attention finally will land. And so that's what this slide is getting at, is that our attention is being turned into dollar signs. And in some ways, that's not ethical. In some ways, they're causing a mental health and causing, again, there's many different factors to one thing that's happening, but this is definitely a part of the root. So this is definitely a part of the central, main, fundamental etiology of some of these mental health impacts. So they're using attention as a commodity. They're even buying and selling it amongst themselves. They're selling your attention, right? Some of the things that they do, the way that they do it is designed to be addictive. It's designed to influence that probability that your attention is going to land on their product. They want your attention to land on Pepsi, not Coke, right? Because they're Pepsi and they want you to buy their products. It's not ethical. The way that they're doing it in a lot of cases is with full knowledge that they are causing the person to become even more scattered. And it affects every aspect of one's life experience, physiologically, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally. Fractured attention can definitely impact all of those things in a very unproductive, unbeneficial type of way. So what we need to do is we need to reclaim the user agency. We need to reclaim the mind and attention and be more purposeful with it, be more deliberate with it, make sure that we're still going to be influenced by the probability, but we can influence the probability cloud. There's ways to do that. And the Four Directions practice is all about affecting the probability of where your attention is going to land. Did it land where you want it to, so that you can create the life that you want? Okay. All right. So this is now talking again about the overload, right? And the overload, as we know, and actually I think wasn't it Australia who it's 125 2026. So I think it was Australia who put a limit on social media for kids. I'm not saying that's good or bad, that's right or wrong. That's a political decision by Australia, and I'm sure they have many factors in doing that. So it's not my place to say, but there's a reason. So they clearly didn't just do that for funsies, right? So they're doing that because they think that there's a problem with the amount of information that is bombarding the young mind. So you can see this. Kids who are very young already have cell phones, already have social media accounts, are already on their iPads and devices way more than, I'm not going to say they should or shouldn't, that's an individual thing, but probably way more than they should, and definitely way more than human beings have been exposed to at any point in history. So we are literally experiencing something that, as far as we can record, as far as we know, has never happened throughout the extent of the human species. We have never been exposed to this much stimuli. And as the slide, puts it, it's an unstoppable, or seemingly at least unstoppable, current of information. It's not unstoppable. Where you place yourself and how you place yourself has a lot to do with the amount of information that you're being exposed to. But when we have this constant, torrent of information, this constant influx of data and information, and people trying to control us, all of the things that we teach in YiGong become, and in the Four Directions of Attention, become necessary. So we need to learn again how to become more adaptive and more resilient. And that's very difficult right now in the modern aspect, the modern society. But this again is talking about selective consumption and knowledge management. Again, there's organizations that are benefiting from, either overexposing or underexposing our attention to these different factors, to these different pieces of information or the knowledge that they're hoping to share. I do like this sentence. The future success depends on harmonizing technical innovation with mindful behavior. Mm. So one of the big difference between the Four Directions and just mindful behavior, mindful is kind of a step in the direction of the Four Directions, but the Four Directions is more engaging. So that's one of the biggest difference between what we would call mindfulness and what we would call the Four Directions of Attention. The Four Directions of Attention is purposeful engagement. Sometimes mindfulness is just pay attention, just be present, just be an observer. And that's great. That has a lot of value. And that's a part of the YiGong system, the Four Directions of Attention. But it's more than that, right? So this system goes beyond mindfulness. All right. So that's the end of the slideshow. So yeah, I can go ahead and wrap this up for you guys. So let's review. We talked about a huge need, right? There's a very large need in the world, in the United States, and the need is something that can help us to be more deliberate, more intentional, and more specific with our attention and our attention span, which is what we call focused attention, our ability to maintain our attention on a task, maintain our attention on an activity, on maybe a deliberate thought, something that we're thinking on purpose because it serves us, it suits us, it puts us in the right direction for the rest of our day or for the rest of our activities. So there's a need, right? The human being in general, their mind is being dominated by forces that are directly beyond their ability to influence to some extent. So what we're looking to do, and that's what this practice will be about, that's what the four directions is focused on, is creating a lifelong practice of being present and engaging the present moment in a way that helps a person learn. It can help a person grow as an individual. It can help a person evolve, which is change over time with self-awareness. And so I'm going to finish with the ultimate goal of this practice is to help a person learn, grow, and evolve with self-awareness because you're changing over time anyway. That's the definition of evolution. Everybody's doing it. But are you doing it with awareness of yourself? And that's what this practice really starts to focus on. But before we can do that, we have to identify that we are in a crisis, right? Before we can get out of a situation, we have to first recognize that we're in a situation. So hopefully this video, this class, this can help you see that. And if you have questions, if you have comments, you can always reach out to us. There's all kinds of ways. We're on social media, and the school will have a way for us to communicate. So, I hope you found this information useful. And, we do have a lot of focused topics of discussion, but if you have questions, anything that you would like us to focus on, just let us know and we'll do our best. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will be back for more information, more videos, more tools, more techniques. That's what this is all about. Things that we can do to address this crisis of attention. All right. Thanks a lot. And I'll see you guys again sometime soon.